On the night of November 5, a powerful earthquake off the coast of Kamchatka and the Kuril Islands caused a tsunami of enormous force. In a matter of hours, 3 waves up to 18 meters high destroyed the town of Severo Kurilsk and about 15 villages. The ocean became the grave, according to various estimates, of 2.3 to 50,000 people. There was not a single line about it in the Soviet press. The Union was preparing to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the October Revolution. There were no disaster warning systems in the Soviet Union in those years, so absolutely no one was prepared for what happened next. The first, an 8-meter tsunami wave flooded houses in the lowlands of the city. The second one, 15 meters high, swept away everything on its way: houses, trucks, half-dressed people fleeing to the hills. Those who did not die on the spot were frozen in the icy ocean water. Bodies were thrown on the ground during all winter. People were buried for several months. In the diary of the chief of Kamchatka volcanology station of his USSR Boris Pyap in December 1952, it was written down: on Severo Kurilsk in about 40 minutes after the first shaking 2 seismic sea waves came up. Radio station kept transmitting SOS, but in a nonsense manner, so that Petropavlovsk couldn't understand anything. Practically no trace of the town of 6,000 people was left, only a few buildings on the high outskirts and 2 concrete structures, the stadium gate and a monument to the hero of the Soviet Union, pilot Talalakin. Together with Severo Kurilsk, the islands of Paramushar and Shumshu, with a civilian population of 10,500 and Soviet servicemen, the exact number is still unknown. Local historians counted at least 8,000 dead. Miraculously, the survivors were evacuated in early 1953. During the tsunami, hundreds of soldiers and officers died. What was left of the settlements was not guarded in any way. As a consequence, looting began. A strongbox with 270,000 rubles, an enormous amount of money at the time, was stolen from an administrative institution. You can see warnings like this on the coast of Sakhalin in towns and villages. There was a tsunami disaster in our history too, a big one, a terrible one. But then, in November 1952, the newspapers were silent. In Severo Kurilsk, the phrase "living like a volcano" can be used without quotation marks. The island of Paramushar, 23 volcanoes, 5 of them active. Ubeko, 7 kilometers from the city, occasionally comes to life and releases volcanic gases. In calm and westerly winds they reach Severo Kurilsk, it is impossible not to smell hydrogen sulfide and chlorine. Usually in such cases the Sakhalin Hydrometeor Center sends out a storm warning about air pollution. Toxic gases can be easily poisoned. The eruptions on Paramushar in 1859 and 1934 caused mass poisoning of people and death of domestic animals. So volcanologists in such cases urge residents to use masks to protect breathing and filters to purify water. The site for Severo Kurilsk was chosen without volcanological expertise. Then, in the 1950s, the main thing was to build the city not less than 30 meters above sea level. After the tragedy of 1952, the water seemed scarier than fire. In the fall of 1952, the country lived its normal life. The Soviet press, Pravda, and Izvestia didn't get a single line about neither tsunami in Kurils, nor thousands of killed people. The picture of what happened can be reconstructed only by memories of eyewitnesses and rare photos. Classified tsunami. Tsunami wave after the earthquake in Japan reached the Kuril Islands. It was not very high, 1.5 meters high. In autumn of 1952, the eastern coast of Kamchatka and the islands of Paramushar and Shumshu were in the first line of the tsunami. The Severo Kurilsk tsunami of 1952 was one of the 5 largest in the history of the 20th century. The city of Severo Kurilsk was destroyed. The Kuril and Kamchatka settlements of Utesny, Levashovo, Reef, Kamenisty, Prebrezhny, Galkino, Akinsky, Pajorny, Major Van, Shelikovo, Savishkino, Kozarevsky, Babishkino, and Bikovo were swept away. In those years, the work of counting residents in Severo Kurilsk was not properly set up. Seasonal workers, classified military units, the composition of which was not disclosed. According to the official report, in 1952 about 6,000 people lived in Severo Kurilsk. In 1951, 82-year-old South Sakhalin resident Konstantin Ponedelnikov went to the Kurils with his comrades to earn some extra money. They built houses, plastered walls, helped to install reinforced concrete ambassadorial vats at the fish processing plant. In those years there were a lot of newcomers in the Far East. They were recruited and worked for a fixed term. It all happened on the night of November 4 to 5. I was still single, so I came in late from the street at 2 or 3 o'clock. I was living in an apartment at the time, renting a room from a family compatriot, also from Kubashev. It was only light, what was it? The house shook. The landlord shouted, "Get up quickly, get dressed, and go outside." He'd lived there for years and knew what to do, says Konstantin Ponedelnikov. Konstantin ran out of the house, lit a cigarette. The ground was shaking sensibly under his feet. All of a sudden the shooting, shouting, noise was heard from the shore. In the light of the ship's searchlights, people were running from the bay. War. They shouted. So, at least, it seemed to the lad at first. Later he realized, a wave. Water. From the sea in the direction of the hills, where the border guard unit stood, there were self-propelled vehicles. And together with the rest of them Konstantin ran after, upwards. 3 waves. After the first wave left, many people went down to find their missing relatives and to let the cattle out of the barns. People did not know, tsunamis have long waves, and sometimes tens of minutes pass between the first and second waves. The population was evacuated promptly. After a short call from Stalin to the Sakhalin Regional Committee, all the nearby airplanes and boats were sent to the disaster area. Konstantin, among about 300 victims, was on the steamer Amderma, fully loaded with fish. Half of the coal hold was unloaded for the people, a tarpaulin was thrown in. Through Korsakov they were brought to Primary, where they lived for some time in very hard conditions. But then, those on top decided that the recruitment contracts had to be worked out and sent everyone back to Sakhalin. There was no question of any material compensation, it was good if they could at least confirm their length of service. Konstantin was lucky, his boss remained alive and restored his work record books and passports. Fishing place. Many of the destroyed villages were never rebuilt. The population of the islands declined sharply. The port city of Severo Kurilsk was rebuilt to a new location, higher up. Without the same volcanological expertise, the city ended up in an even more dangerous place, in the path of mudslides of Abeko volcano, one of the most active on the Kuril Islands. Life in the port of Severo Kurilsk has always been about fish. The work was profitable, people came, lived, left, there was some movement. In 1970 to 1980s only idlers on the sea did not earn 1,500 rubles a month, an order of magnitude more than on a similar job on the mainland. In the 90s, crab was caught and brought to Japan. But in the late 2000s, the Federal Agency for Fisheries was forced to ban Kamchatka crab fishing almost completely. In order not to disappear at all. Today, compared to the late 1950s, the population has decreased by 3 times. Today in Severo Kurilsk, or as the locals say, Sevker, there are about 2,500 people. Of these, 500 are under the age of 18. In the maternity ward of the hospital 30 to 40 citizens are born every year, the birthplace of which is Severo Kurilsk. The fish processing plant provides the country with stocks of saffron cod, plaice and pollock. About half of the workers are local. The rest are newcomers, verboten, recruited. They earn about 25,000 a month. They only dream of tourists in Paramusher. Visitors are accommodated in the fisherman's house, a place that is only partially heated. It is true, the CHP in Sevker has been recently modernized and a new pier was built in the port. One of the problems is the inaccessibility of Paramusher. It is more than 1,000 kilometers to Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, 300 kilometers to Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. Kilometers to Petropavlovsk-Kamchatka. The helicopter flies once a week on condition of weather in Petrik, in Severo Kurilsk, and on Cape Lopatka where Kamchatka ends. It's good if you wait a couple of days. Or maybe 3 weeks. Amazing in this story is the scale of looting. Especially against a background of human feats, which were performed sometimes at the cost of their own lives. The silence of newspapers about the tragedy can be explained by the holiday on November 7th. The extant accounts and testimonies are full of examples of astonishing human bravery. Here were fishermen who loaded people into their kungurs, and Alperin, director of the local fish factory, who died saving others, and unknown schoolgirls who dragged an old woman to the hills. The major of militia Smirnov wrote in the report written after the last traces, during the critical moments many anonymous heroes risked their lives to perform heroic deeds. However, cases of looting in those days also occurred. A popular rumor even speaks of the murders of police officers who hastily guarded safe deposit boxes with money and surviving property. The official number of victims is 2,336. Unofficial, up to 13,000, even up to 50,000. The real number, according to estimates of Doctor of Physical and Mathematical Sciences, head of Tsunami Laboratory of the Institute of Oceanology of the Russian Academy of Sciences E. Kulikov, Doctor of Physics and Mathematics, head of the Tsunami Laboratory at the Institute of Oceanology of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Dispersal of figures is connected with the fact that besides civilian population on which accounting is simple in general, there were many military units deployed on islands, including secret ones, and statistics on them is not clear. This tragedy was the impetus for creating the Tsunami Warning Service. Severo Kurilsk was rebuilt. 11 settlements of the Kuril Islands ceased to exist because they were completely destroyed by the tsunami. That was 69 years ago. Now do you understand the significance of these plaques placed along the Sakhalin coast? If you were interested, thank the author by putting a like. And also do not forget to subscribe so as not to miss the outputs of even more interesting videos of my channel. Turn on notifications by clicking on the bell and share this video with your friends. What else interesting can you add to this video? Write in the comments, it will be interesting to read.